Hello YouTube, I'm Joey Russo, disabled competitive pistol shooter and retired Rangemaster, here with another episode of the Rangemaster's Bench to explain how I created an uncommanded discharge in my SIG P320. Before we begin, let me add my standard disclaimer. These are obviously still only my professional opinions, based on over 30 years serving in professions of arms. So you will better understand my perspective, I will once again post down below my training and experience. I will also add as a warning, any attempt to replicate my actions are strongly discouraged, and done so at your own risk. I assume no responsibility. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's get down to it. Motivation for this video comes from an unsolicited email I recently received from a well-known P320 gunsmith and parts manufacturer. An excerpt from this email reads as follows. Quote, "What we've found and what we're still testing. At redacted, we don't take anything for granted. We test, we push, and we go beyond normal use conditions to find out what a firearm is truly capable of. Over the years in controlled environments, we have deliberately attempted to compromise the mechanical safeties of the P320, looking for ways an unintended discharge could occur. Despite those efforts, we have never been able to induce a discharge without the trigger being actuated. That does not mean people are wrong to be asking questions. The fact that we have not been able to make it happen does not change the reality that people believe it's happening. We understand that too, and because of that, we are going to continue to explore every scenario, no matter how implausible it may seem. If there's a way for a failure to occur, we want to find it, understand it, and make sure the people who depend on this firearm have the information they need. Please know that at this moment, every single person at redacted still has faith that a SIG P320 cannot fire without the trigger being acted on by something. That confidence is built on years of testing, evaluation, and our own first-hand experience with the platform." End quote. Well, after reading this, I decided, well, heck, I know a little bit. Let me see if I can help them find a way for a seemingly impossible failure to occur. Now, before I begin, if you haven't watched my previous video, I recommend you do prior to watching this presentation. I will link to it in the description below. The information I will be covering today builds on topics previously discussed, and my assumption will be you're up to speed. Alright, let's first talk about the P320 I'll be using today. We'll be taking the Wayback Machine back to 2014, the year I bought not one, but two of the then new hotness known as the SIG P320. This pistol is an early production full-size model which never went through the voluntary upgrade. This means it doesn't have a disconnector, has a thicker, heavier weight curved trigger shoe, heavier weight striker pin, and a heavier weight sear without the second ledge, or as I call it, intercept notch. When I say these parts are heavier, I mean they have greater mass, and thus due to inertia, once they start moving, will be harder to stop. Now some of you may be already calling a foul, saying it's not fair to use an initial production non-voluntary upgraded P320. Everyone knows those guns have problems. I disagree, and here's why. Despite the well-documented drop-safe issues with these early guns, SIG still, to this day, insists this model P320 is safe, meeting and exceeding all U.S. safety standards. Presumably, since the early guns are considered safe, SIG has never recalled them, only offering that voluntary upgrade. Because of this, I think this early production gun is fair game to use. I will post a link to SIG's voluntary upgrade webpage in the description below. There's a very informative video there which details the differences between voluntary upgrade and non-voluntary upgraded guns, which is worth checking out for better understanding. This early production P320 has another unique characteristic. In a twist of fate, or maybe irony, the well-known P320 gunsmith and maker of P320 parts who sent the email also worked on this pistol, performing their Competition Action Cleanup Perfection Job. Here's the invoice. Notice the serial number listed, 58B as in Bravo, 002738. And here's the serial number on the pistol's FCU. One and the same. You will soon realize why this is relevant. Okay, spoiler alert. This P320 will experience an uncommanded discharge. Let me show you how I created the conditions for the so-called impossible failure. This slide captures our recipe for disaster, outlining the steps I took to induce failure. Here you see the 3 issue categories I discussed on the previous video. First, part dimensional issues, occurring as a result of inconsistencies in part manufacture and or due to wear. Next, fitment issues between parts and or assemblies. This is referring to the spacing between individual parts and or assemblies, aka tolerances. Lastly, environmental issues, both external influences and internal conditions. To ensure failure, my goal was to create at least one problem in each of the 3 issue categories. Starting with what I deemed the baseline design deficiency, the floating sear, I then added a problem from our first issue category, a part dimensional issue being an altered sear. Recall, this pistol was worked on by the well-known P320 gunsmith and parts manufacturer who also sent the email. As part of their competition action cleanup perfection job, the sear was dimensionally altered, starting with the left image, looking from the top down onto both of the sears. Here is the front and here is the back. On the right, this one here, you see the original factory stock sear, and on the left you see the gunsmith altered sear. When comparing to the stock sear, you can see the top surface of the gunsmith altered sear has material removed, forming this diagonal cut running from lower left to upper right, this area here. Moving now to the right image, we are looking at each sear's engagement surfaces as viewed from the rear looking towards the front. Here is the top and here is the bottom. By the way, these 2 projections underneath each sear, that's where the sear springs attach. Notice the gunsmith altered sear has less available engagement surface when compared to the stock sear. The gunsmith altered sear has a diagonal cut, removing material from the upper left downwards to the lower right. I should note I am classifying the gunsmith's removal of sear material as a type of deliberate wear. Alright, for the next issue category, fitment between parts and or assemblies, I have 2 problems. The first being reduced contact between the striker pin lug and sear engagement surface. Returning to the engagement surface views of the 2 sears, again stock sear on the right and the gunsmith altered sear here on the left, we can get an idea of the reduction of available contact area between the striker pin lug and engagement surface of the gunsmith altered sear. Also worth mentioning is the striker pin lug's wear pattern, particularly noticeable on the gunsmith altered sear, which appears off-center to the left as viewed. Rotational movement within the slide assembly of the striker pin assembly, also referred to as clocking, could potentially be causing this, but I am unsure if striker pin assembly clocking contributes to any failure. The second problem I created in the fitment between parts and or assemblies issue category relates to use of non-factory specification, weaker competition springs for both the sear and safety lock. Starting first with the sear springs, to the right are the factory stock sear springs, and to the left are the competition springs. The wire diameter of the stock sear springs is noticeably heavier or thicker when compared to the lighter or thinner competition springs. Anecdotally, I can tell you the perceived difference of effort to press the rear of the sear down between the stock sear springs and the competition sear springs is significant, with the competition sear springs requiring much less pressure than the stock springs to move the sear downwards. Next, looking at the safety lock spring, we have again the factory stock spring to the right and the competition spring to the left. In this case, the wire diameter of both appears the same. What is different, however, are the acute angles. The factory stock safety lock spring has a greater or higher angle of approximately 60 degrees than the competition spring, which has a sharper or lower angle of approximately 50 degrees. The competition spring's lower angle translates into less resistance or spring tension being applied to the safety lock. Here again, anecdotally, the perceived pressure to push the safety lock upwards to clear the striker pin's path is much less with the competition spring versus with the factory stock spring. In the third issue category of environmental issues, for external influences, I subjected the pistol to jarring shock and vibration by repeatedly striking the top of the slide with a 6-ounce nylon hammer. So again, I used a 6-ounce nylon hammer, striking the top of the slide just forward of the rear sight here to create that jarring shock and vibration. You know, it's whack, whack, whack. Again, sound effects are always optional. In environmental issues, internal conditions, heavy fouling consisting of carbon, soot, brass shavings, and unburnt Winchester 231 powder from shooting my old handloads, and lubricant was added all around the sear, safety lever, safety lock, and striker pin. As you can see, this fouling is some nasty stuff. And again, was added all around the sear, the safety lever, as well as the safety lock and striker pin itself, all in an effort to try and impair movement and compromise function. Now, having created multiple problems dispersed across all three issue categories, this P320 is doomed to fail. Let's see it happen. All right, I don't want to bust a cap indoors, so we're out in the garage here with this early production SIG P320. What I have inside the chamber is a primed empty case. I'm going to go ahead and start with the environmentals by tapping the top of the slide with the nylon hammer, and we'll see that striker pin slip off that gunsmith altered sear. Hand is nowhere near the trigger at all. Here we go. All right, so let's just see what we got. Sorry guys, got a kind of awkward angle here. Show you the case, all one type of deal. So here's our case that went off. Let's do a quick field strip. All right, I know the angle's kind of deal. Let's check real quick sear and safety lever function. Here's my sear. Again, it doesn't take much force, but it's moving freely. The sear operation appears normal. Here's our safety lever. And the safety lever's moving. But it's kind of sluggish going back against the sear housing, but it's moving. That's okay. And lastly, try to get this angle for you. Let's check our safety lock function. So I'll try test one and push button. Okay. So the safety lock, yeah, I can feel it. It's intermittently catching the striker pin. So yeah, there it goes. It's failing test one. Obviously it passes test two because it hit the primer, and then it's the striker pin reset spring appears to be working. It's pushing the striker pin back. But anyway, there it is, the so-called impossible uncommanded discharge. Woo! All right, with what we just witnessed still fresh in our minds, do understand, each pistol presents its own unique, individual characteristics, and as a result, may react differently to problems from the 3 issue categories. This case-by-case causal complexity is what makes it so difficult to investigate uncommanded discharge allegations. My goal was to exploit as many vulnerabilities as possible to create the so-called impossible failure, and I did. But while successful, this represents a sample size of only one P320 out of literally millions. Put another way, what was done to create failure in this particular P320 may not apply to other P320s. Therefore, the how I made the uncommanded discharge happen in one pistol, while interesting, is not the real takeaway from this video. This presentation's main point is the fact the so-called impossible failure, a discharge without actuating the trigger, happened at all. Remember our context. The manufacturer said the P320 cannot, under any circumstances, discharge without a trigger pull. And recall, the well-known P320 gunsmith and parts manufacturer, who also worked on this pistol, wrote in their email, despite for years having deliberately attempted to compromise the P320's mechanical safeties, they have never been able to induce a discharge without the trigger being actuated. Yet, after showing you how I induce system failures, I demonstrated this very event happening. That is, a P320 discharge without the trigger being actuated. The real truth about the P320 is this. As I have said repeatedly, any mechanical device, to include the P320, can fail. For the manufacturer or anyone else to assert otherwise is absurd. I'm Joey Russo, disabled competitive pistol shooter and retired Rangemaster. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care, and remember, where there's a will, there's always a way. Don't let anything keep you from pursuing your passion.